The Radical Secular Podcast, a demand for justice, equality, and rational public policy.
Hello and welcome back to The Radical Secular. I'm Christophe Defoe.
I'm Sean Prophet.
And I'm Joe Kipinti.
Today's episode is the first in what I hope will become a series of episodes focusing on the challenges around self-actualization, and to put it in perhaps a different and less precise way, how the hell do we get happy and how the hell do we stay happy? And is there a sort of secular spirituality that can help us along that path? And in that vein, meditation is a topic for our discussion today. What is meditation practice? What is it not? Is meditation practice a religion? Is meditation harmful? Is it useful? These issues remain unsettled law among the members of the Radical Secular team, so this conversation should be interesting and a lot of fun. And in our news segment today, we'll discuss the latest in the very much ongoing fight against COVID-19. But before we get into any of that, I want to remind you that if you like our show, make sure to subscribe, leave a review, check out theradicalsecular.com, and tell your friends to listen. New episodes post Mondays at noon Eastern on YouTube and all the major podcast channels. And if you're into reading, check out the blog at theradicalsecular.com.
Visit our website at theradicalsecular.com and sign up for free access to exclusive content and giveaways, our full library of episodes, and articles at the Radical Secular blog. Email us with your comments and suggestions, and follow us on social media.
Okay, and speaking of the blog, I posted last week on the Radical Secular blog. I'm going to hit you with a brief overview now. My post was called Just for Today, and it was my reaction to my fellow liberals' reaction to the guilty verdict in the Chauvin trial. In response to the practically non-existent victory celebration among liberals, I argue that we should have celebrated that verdict as a win, and that we should have done so fully, and we should have done so heartily. We have a lot of sad days ahead of us in the fight for justice. So when we do have a happy day, we should be happy. We'll need that hope to get us going, to keep us going during the inevitable dark days ahead. So that was just the gist of the article. Anybody want to comment on it? Or we don't have to, but if you have something to say, say it.
Well, I think it's very important to do that. And especially now that we found out that they are his attorneys are trying to get a new trial. So when that verdict happened, we knew there was going to be pushback, and we knew there was going to be, a lot of people were very upset about it. And so, take the time to celebrate the wins and gird ourselves for the next fight.
Exactly.
Yeah. We have to sustain the effort. So it's not a sprint, right? It's a marathon. And so we need sustenance, and having those hopeful moments, feeling like what we're doing actually makes a difference in actionability, that it actually manifests into real stuff. I mean, that's important. And I understand the impulse to say, oh, wait a minute, let's back up here. This isn't a real victory because it's so, but I do understand that. And it's okay to do that to a certain extent, but also just to express our need to have hope and to feel like our agency matters.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's an important point, Joe. There is a long way to go. This was just a drop in the bucket. But the fight that we have ahead of us is a fight, and it's a long fight, and we need that shot in the arm, right? Sometimes we do this show, right? And we hear somebody from time to time tell us, oh, we like your show. I can't tell you how much of a shot in the arm that is for me, right? Like that is like, oh shit, someone's actually listening. We're actually doing something here, right? And so I'm making it's kind of a crude analogy, but I think the analogy holds because it's like, look, we are in this for the long haul. And so those little bits of like, oh, that feels good. Let's appreciate them is what I'm getting at.
Absolutely.
Yeah, definitely. When I had a student, as a educator, I had a student email me telling me that she was interested in doing public service, and she really got inspired by my class, and she wants to look into options of what she could do with her life that would help humanity. I'm like, that's just like beautiful for me. It's like it really validates all the efforts that I put into teaching. Whenever that little bit happens, and it's the same here. It's the same kind of thing. It's a validation.
Validation. Great point, Joe. Great fucking point.
You never know who you're reaching. You never know who you're touching, because especially with being in public, whether it's as a professor or being like us, like our podcast here, we don't know who's listening. We don't know how their lives are being affected. We hope it's positive. And that's why we take it very seriously that we get our positions right and we talk to each other, help make each other better on all of these things, so that we are presenting something that is going to be helping the world and not hurting in some way.
Absolutely. Great point, guys. And so, well, before we get into our discussion, we got to do the t-shirts, obviously. So let's do the t-shirts. Who wants to go first? Sean, go ahead. Okay.
Mine almost needs no introduction. And let's see if anybody gets it. It is the knights who say "ni," right, from Monty Python. And it's kind of my homage to the absurd right now, because as Christophe said, we are not all here on the Radical Secular in agreement about meditation. And my point of view at various times has been that meditation is kind of absurd. So maybe that's controversial here, and we'll talk it out.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know what? That's I think it's nice to have something that we don't necessarily all agree on all the fine points on, and we can have a little discussion about that. And I think it'll be useful for our listeners, and it'll be useful for us as well. Joe, go ahead.
And by the way, I bet there's a great skit by Monty Python on meditation somewhere. There's got to be. There has to be. So my shirt, I went with a theme of like unity and peace, and he is just planet Earth seen from the moonrise.
Very nice.
People have been talking about that lately with a probe on Mars and all of that, and to sort of a reflection of ourselves, of humanity, and self-reflection is part of meditation. So I thought maybe they went together.
There you go.
Very good.
I love it. And today I wore my Vulcan IDIC shirt because, as we know, the Vulcans love their meditation. They love their meditation. So even though it's a fictional thing, obviously, that is
what
we hope actually that it's not actually a fictional thing. Although we could do without the World War III. Part of Star Trek, or we just skip over that part, and maybe just the Bell riots. Maybe we can tolerate the Bell riots if that gets us to first contact, right?
Right. So, skip over the 2020s though, in general.
Exactly, just skip over the 2020s altogether. So just so everybody who's watching can see the Vulcan IDIC.
That's awesome, man.
And that's and IDIC stands for infinite diversity and infinite combinations, which is the philosophy of the Vulcans, and in a lot of ways the philosophy of Starfleet and the Federation in general. So there we go. We did our t-shirts. Now let's talk some news, and we are just going to get right into it. The New York Times reports that with respect to the COVID-19 pandemic, quote, there is widespread consensus among scientists and public health experts that the herd immunity threshold is not attainable, end quote. Very simple quote. Didn't even need to quote it, really. I could have just said that. Gentlemen, let's discuss this. And I'm going to start with Joe, because Joe, you think about this stuff a little bit, I think.
Well, yeah, I do. Right. Well, I've been monitoring how the vaccination effort is going. And it was going like gangbusters, but about 3 or 4 weeks ago, it started to peter off, and now it's dropping dramatically, like the number of people who are getting vaccinated. So we seem to have reached a peak of like the easy targets of people who want to be vaccinated, right? And now we're delving into the realm of the undecided, and then the people who are totally against it. And there is so much ridiculous bullshit around it right now. It's crazy.
So much.
I heard the best one yet a couple of days ago, local, not on social media, but like in RL, right? About this woman who thought that it was a plot to stop white babies from being born. That's why she wasn't going to get vaccinated.
Oh yeah.
I just go, wow. I mean, anyway, that's an extreme, mate, hopefully. But
it's not that extreme, because it's been across the board. I saw a Latino woman who had been interviewed the other day, and she said that she was worried about having a miscarriage if she got the vaccine. It's out there. This misinformation is out there, just fear and nonsense.
And you have to wonder, like what I tell people is you're going against medical advice. You realize that, right? All of the skeptics and all of the resistance to the vaccinations, where is that coming from? So here you have a body of institutions and researchers and doctors, millions of hours of work to understand through lots of experimentation and analysis and statistics and demographics what's going on versus this guy on YouTube, right? That has absolutely no background. And somehow they go with a guy on YouTube.
Yeah. And you know what? What's really interesting too, and I don't mean to cut you off here, but well, I guess I do mean to cut you off. I mean, I'm literally doing that. But my point is that just commenting though, because I don't want to
Christophe,
lose
I'm okay because I got my cup of chamomile tea. I thought this would be great for a meditation thing because this is like liquid meditation right here. So
yeah, it really
go ahead and
is.
cut me off. I'll be fine.
Wait, my liquid meditation is a gin and tonic. Okay, so
yeah, there you go, for sure.
that might be better.
That'll do the job for sure. I think it's funny though that the same person who is like your person you're talking about, Sean, is like, all right, I'm afraid that I'm going to have a miscarriage if I get this thing, but meanwhile I'm going to be really comfortable going to I probably have a doctor that helps me with all of my pregnancy. I follow those instructions to the letter, right? Mm-hmm. And all that stuff is based on the same scientific processes that bring you vaccines. So that's what really drives me crazy. It's like, wait, you get to pick and choose when science applies? And really what it is a lack of being able to reason through this stuff,
I do want to say one thing though. In fairness, there is a lot to critique about the medical system in terms of, but it's not really about the science behind it as much as it is about the way medicine is administered.
Sure.
Or isn't administered, right? So, or the problems with, the corporatization of hospitals and all of that stuff. And people can't distinguish between like the actual, solid science that's being done and then all these other sort of more political problems that are associated with.
Yeah, there's a race-based component to this because of previous medical experimentation on Black people.
Sure. Right.
There is a gender-based component because in a lot of cases, women have not been listened to by their male doctors, particularly gynecologists, and there's been abuse there. So there are reasons for people to be skeptical, but I don't think this comes down to reason. I think people have just decided it's a symbology. They connect the vaccine to the fact that they didn't want to stay home during the pandemic, to the fact that they want their freedom, their libertarianism. The government doesn't know what it's talking about. I don't like the government. So it's just this constellation of bad ideas. And so then when it comes down to getting a jab that it hurts and you might feel like you got the flu for a couple of days, which you do. I mean, I'll tell you, after my last shot, it was a little gnarly, but the good thing about it is that that's how I knew my immune system was working. And I feel like Superman now. I mean, I feel like I know. We just went and ate in a restaurant, and I'm like, I'm happy to do it. Doesn't matter. And so that's the benefit on the other side. But I think that the fear of just the jab, it's going to hurt, I'm going to feel sick, that is a lot of it. And it's also then their tribe, how they appear to their friends. I'm not a coward. I don't care about that stuff. I'm not scared of COVID. I'm not going to live in fear, but you fear the shot.
Right. That's right. Yeah. That's what I think those are all incredibly important points, Sean. And, I just wanted to comment too, that after I got that second shot and I for probably several days after, I didn't feel like I felt chills the sort of night of, but everything was very, very mild for me. And I kind of lucked out in that way. But the Superman thing, I'm now walking around. I'm like, oh my God, I didn't realize how much that was sort of on my shoulder, the fear of getting sick. Right. I still wear a mask, obviously. If for no other reason, the joke is I don't want anyone to think that I'm a Republican, right? So like, I don't want to go out.
That's for sure.
Because God forbid somebody think that's like worse than I don't know. That's terrible. So, but so I still wear the mask, and obviously, and if for nothing else, just because to be courteous to other people and to be consistent with social norms as they exist right now. But there is this sense of like, oh my God, I am free.
Yeah.
We're going to have a couple people over later. It's going to be great.
Every time I would walk around inside a building, whether it's the grocery store, it's like, I'm just doing this the whole time for the last year. It's like, I got to be in here. I'm going to get out as fast as I can. I don't want to talk to you. Get away from me.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, when I had my shot, I have a scar from my smallpox shot when I was a little kid. It's pretty pronounced. And so the guy's like, where do you want it? I'm like, right there, baby, right in my smallpox shot.
Nice. And he did it? He was already.
Yeah, he did it. Yeah. But, I think the other thing is, too, there's a couple other things I want to say about this.
Yeah, go for it.
One, the success of the vaccine is actually making people relaxed and then saying we don't need it. Right. So, when there were 4,000 people a day dying versus 800, people were like more willing to do it. Now that it's going down, other people are doing it, so I don't have to. It's working with them, so I don't have to kind of attitude. And then there's honestly, you have to think about how humans assess like danger is through sort of personal interaction. So they hear it from somebody, and this is how, in hunter-gatherers and foragers, probably for hundreds of thousands of years, it's like you assess danger because somebody next to you said, look, there's danger, right? And rather than, looking at statistics and analyses and science and relying on institutions, there's always that you have to try to punch through, and it's not easy. Right. Yeah. And so when people make the argument, well, you get this vaccine, it's not known, it's a new technology, maybe it will lead to problems in the future. Oh, yeah. I'm not going to do it.
What a lot of people don't realize is that none of this stuff stays in your body. Like the mRNA, it goes in once, your cells figure out, oh, that's the invader, and then it disappears and gets eliminated. This is not like it's going to have a side effect later. It's not in your body after that.
Right. Not to mention that we get foreign bits of mRNA inserted in us all the times by natural viruses.
Mm-hmm. Oh, interesting.
Right? That's what viruses do. Right. And so it's not that the body's not used to that. So you're right, absolutely right, Sean. I mean, the immune system breaks it down, destroys it. Right. That's the whole point.
Yeah, and that's only true of our Moderna and Pfizer and Johnson & Johnson and the other one, AstraZeneca. Yeah, because the Sinovacs and the Sputnik and these other ones are not. They use a virus to deliver the immune messages. They use an actual virus, and so they're not as effective.
Well, actually, the J&J vaccine and AstraZeneca also use a virus, but it's not the COVID virus.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
It's a milder sort of virus that's out there in the environment that has been there forever, and it doesn't really cause much problems. But they use that as a means to. Only the mRNA vaccines are using actually bits of code of genetic code.
The technology just boggles my mind.
But it is the AstraZeneca and the J&J vaccines are very tried and true technologies. They've been around for decades and decades and decades. The mRNA vaccines are brand new technologies. Mm-hmm. That's as you were saying.
Early adopter here. I want the new stuff.
I like new technology.
I had the Pfizer vaccine.
Me too.
Now, honestly, I would have actually preferred the J&J vaccine because at that time it was known to be more resistant to some of the variants. Mm-hmm. But that information changes all the time.
Sure.
So
sure.
Of course, the other thing we heard this week was that study that came out by the University of Washington. I forget the name, the acronym, but it is the researchers that are most cited by the experts in terms of doing like projections and analysis and statistics about the viruses. And they took a whole bunch of variables and factored them in and estimate that 905,000 people or so have died directly from COVID in the United States alone.
Wow.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, that is a sobering number.
50% higher than what the stats are. And globally, it's even worse. I think
way
worse. Double or maybe even 3 times the number of recorded fatalities.
That's right. And we see those numbers are going to start to go down in the United States because we have the vaccines here. But then places like India, for example, right? I mean, that's the obvious sort of thing to point to. It's like, wow, those without enough vaccines, without a solid distribution plan. I mean, people so compact together, billions of people so compact together. I mean, the numbers are going to be the numbers are staggering. They will be astonishing once this is all over.
It's so far. We're still so far away from this.
So far away.
You can't socially distance in a slum or a favela. You just can't.
Exactly. Right. You know, and I mean, it's a terrible thing. It's a terrible thing. Although I'm glad the Biden move, right, to make these to get rid of the patents and et cetera, et cetera. I think that's putting people over profits, which is not the American way. But you know, it's great that he did that. You know?
Yeah, that's a bold move on his part.
It's
going to piss off a lot of his supporters.
Absolutely.
But here's the thing, though. He's not the only one doing it. Also, the Europeans are doing it, right?
Right. That's right.
And, you know, we made a huge mistake with AIDS.
Right.
Take a decade before that medicine was accessible to people in places like Africa, for example, other parts of the world that couldn't afford it. And that caused the death of several million people, that delay. Probably 10 to 20 million people, just because we delayed that.
The numbers we're talking about here, right? I mean, we in the country, in our country, we talk about Black Lives Matter because Black lives don't matter, right? Or haven't mattered historically. And think about the lives of the Black, brown world that we just shrug our shoulders and 2 million people die, 20 million people die, right? And it's just oh my God, it's so cheap. Life ends up being so cheap.
It's been going on a long time, and that's why I don't know if we've mentioned on this show yet, but the documentary series "Exterminate All the Brutes" is required viewing, and it just demonstrates.
I haven't seen it yet.
It demonstrates how throughout history, how the colonial powers and white people basically have considered Black and brown lives to be completely disposable.
Yeah. I mean, you were talking, Sean, a few weeks ago about militarism, and you know, if you look at the amount of people that the United States militarism has killed directly or indirectly since World War II, it's somewhere around 12 to 20 million people.
Staggering.
Absolutely staggering. And before we get off of the news, I want to do 5 minutes on one more topic. Liz Cheney, go.
Oh, boy. All right. Well, Liz Cheney. All right. I mean, she now realizes the monster that she helped create.
Yeah.
And, you know, she is completely to blame for creating that monster. It's like, you can't take it back. Sorry, you know, and
toothpaste is out of the tube. The toothpaste is out of the tube.
Yeah. It's like the feathers in the wind. They're out there. They're not coming back. The entire party is committed to this big lie. And she helped with that she participated in the birther lie, all kinds of other slurs against President Obama. And, you know, her father was one of the worst humans to ever live.
Ever.
And I don't know what else is there to say. How can you expect, you know, is she going to have a last minute like Darth Vader turnaround? You know, I mean,
the Cheneys really are monsters. You know, politicians are politicians, but their legacy is awful. And like you said, I was talking to Lindsay about this the other day, is that, you know, if the Iraq war, right, and the war in Afghanistan destabilized, which was obviously Cheney's war, destabilized the entire Middle East, and has led to a lot of the problems that we are facing now as a globe. Started right after 9/11.
And these people are like, "Oh, America first. We shouldn't get involved in all these foreign wars." It's like, wait a minute. You just like you can't just turn on a dime. You know, you go over here and you just fuck the world and then leave, right?
And then leave. It's astonishing. And then like, oh, how did this happen? How did the Republican Party become this? What are you talking about? You guys have been using Fox News to pump out right-wing propaganda for fucking 30 years. You shouldn't be surprised at all. They're right. Trump has just said out loud what you've been saying quietly for 30 years. Don't get fucking mad about it now, you know? Yeah. they're going to oust Cheney, and it's going to get worse before it gets better. The Republican Party is going to get way worse before it gets better. I just hope our democracy survives.
I'll take it. If Mitt Romney and Liz Cheney really want to have a change of heart and try to lead the Republican Party back to a loyal opposition kind of a place, have at it. But I'm just, I'm not so sure how sincere, because if Mitt Romney really wants to be one of the good guys, then vote with Democrats on the infrastructure bill.
Exactly.
Prove it to me.
Exactly. Or start your own party, even though you're not going to have any party power. Like, start your own, do something that is not just voting for Republicans 99% of the time and then sending out a tweet saying, "Oh, I oppose this."
My feeling is there's a bit of a Game of Thrones scenario happening behind the scene with the Republicans.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's some power struggles going on. And, even think about Dick Cheney was a neocon, right?
Mm-hmm.
And neocons were totally against Russia. They were like, hey, Russia was a great enemy. Well, they got pushed aside. Either they converted to Trumpism or they got pushed aside, and this is what's been happening over and over. I think Trump is sitting in his throne in Mar-a-Lago, and his sycophants are coming to worship and talking to him and then going back, and they're scared as all get out. Because remember, Liz Cheney was challenged, 3 or 4 months ago,
Mm-hmm.
and there was a secret vote which supported her overwhelmingly, because it was secret, right?
Mm-hmm.
But this is all happening now in public, and so nobody's going to stand up for her because they're scared to. Right?
Well, I think the party has now solidified the big lie that the election was stolen from Donald Trump in 2020. Is now that is the Republican platform. There's no other platform. They have no policy.
Crazy? Isn't that just
so insane? It's insane. We are looking at Liz Cheney and Mitt Romney and saying, "Oh, you guys should be you are the lodestar. You are the guide to guide this party back to sanity." They are right wing maniacs by any stretch of the imagination.
You know how we all felt about Mitt Romney in 2012. I mean, he was the scariest thing ever.
Yeah. He was binders full of women who let the dogs out. Remember that one?
Yes.
Unbelievable.
However, I have to tell you, in the 90s, Mitt Romney was my governor, and he was pretty moderate as a governor in Massachusetts.
Yeah. That's when there used to be Republican moderates.
That's right.
And I think to actually make it past the primaries, right, he had to turn hard right, and he did.
Yeah, he absolutely did. I mean, that's how you have to make it. Even back then in 2012, that was true in the Republican Party. And now it's you just have to be willing to completely deny reality. Look, let's move on, because otherwise we could talk about this stuff forever. So let's talk about something else forever, but really just for like an hour. I'm going to start with requesting some stipulations about meditation, and that's going to be our topic for today. And so the topics are, and so stipulations, for those who don't know the concept, is basically like, these are facts that we agree on the front end for the purposes of this conversation, right? Things that are going to be givens. And stips help sort of, it's at least in the legal term, that's you do this, you stipulate to the court in a case or for a motion or whatever, that these facts are true, so we do not need to argue about them. And so my first stipulation is that proselytization is bad. So whether you are proselytizing or evangelizing about Jesus Christ or meditation or yoga or anything else, really is we don't want to hear about it, and I think that's bad. Secondly, meditation practice. I want to make the distinction here between meditation practice on one side, which is valid and a valid conversation, and the meditation industry and the gurus and all. And I don't understand that there's overlap there necessarily, but I want to know what do you guys think about that, and do you want to add any stipulations?
I think I'm very glad you made those, because that's one of the things I was going to say, is that it's almost inseparable, meditation and the meditation industry, spiritual pride, proselytizing, yoga, lifestyle, all of that kind of all runs together. It's very, very hard to separate. So I'm glad you said that. Yeah,
it is hard to separate. It is.
It is. I agree with that 100%.
Yeah. And we'll talk about some of the complexities of that as we go along. So the next thing we want to do here is sort of define our terms, and I mean that in a loose sense. How do we define meditation practice? And so Merriam-Webster defines it as follows, and that is 1, to engage in contemplation or reflection, and 2, to engage in mental exercise, such as concentration on one's breathing or repetition of a mantra for the purposes of reaching a heightened level of spiritual awareness. And scholars have found it very difficult to define meditation, mainly because it varies so greatly among traditions and cultures. One of the sort of themes that weave throughout it is sitting and being quiet. But besides that, there are, but even that is up for debate, right? So how do you guys define meditation practice? Anybody want to jump in? Why don't you go ahead?
I want to take a step back even further.
Yeah,
and
please
look at
do.
meditation in the context of religious practices first, because you have, let's say, things like prayer and contemplation, and then you have meditation, and they all sort of, it's a continuum. And if you think about like a prayer, what's the difference between a prayer and a mantra? Sometimes nothing, right? Because it really is the repetition that's doing the work in some ways. So it's very hard to disentangle meditation from that religious tradition. But you can do it, but it's hard, and you have to be very careful. The other thing I would say is that point about proselytizing is really critical.
It is.
Because if you're going to avoid falling into the trap of turning meditation into a destructive practice, that's the number one thing. All of a sudden, you feel like you've awakened to this reality, and you just want to share it with the world on a good level. On a bad level, you want to make fucking a lot of money, right?
Right.
So,
And
the proselytizing is a red flag for me.
Well, okay. And I had a comment here, and that is, I don't really have a definition for meditation because I'm not sure that there's any there. And I think that the one common thread about when people talk about meditation is they say they will describe certain things that you have to do. They will describe ways that you have to quiet your mind or focus on your breathing, or various things that if you don't do those things, a lot of people will tell you you're doing it wrong. And I think that the number one reason why I have a reaction to meditation is because it doesn't feel natural. It feels like a practice, like having to get up and do push-ups or whatever, some ritual that I have to do, or I'm not okay as a person. And but I do find that there are things within myself that I find value of, either thinking about things, contemplating, walking in nature, riding a motorcycle, driving in the car, listening to music, where I do believe that my brain is in that more flow state and ability to just not be in the same mode I am right now when I'm talking to you guys, or when I'm looking at the computer or doing work, whatever it is. But it's more of a relaxed kind of a state where I'm just doing what I want to do, being how I want to be, and feeling okay. Right.
Yeah, and it's literally a different brainwave activity level, right? You can measure that, right? Alpha states and beta states and all that. But I think also, I don't think there is a definition for meditation. I think there is a there to it, and I think there are some positive benefits to it. At least I found that to be true for myself. But it is a very vague and amorphous concept. I mean, the word meditation itself comes from the Latin to ponder, right? So meditation could just be a contemplation, a thinking about yourself and life or whatnot. And then there are traditions within, like the most ancient traditions we know of that have been written down are from India, from about something like 1900 years ago. And in those traditions, meditation was actually a practice of self-examination, and it didn't have a lot of spiritual fluff to it. It was like, shake out your own thoughts, figure out who you are that way. And
yeah. So for me, meditation is how I define it. And I agree with both of you that it is such an amorphous concept, and it is so laden with cultural baggage historically, and certainly now. And we can tease out that into mindfulness as well, and that whole concept. But For me, it's really simply paying extremely close attention to my experience. And we're going to talk a little bit as we go forward about the value of that, or whether or not, whatever I derive from that, but in the most fundamental sense, that's what it is. And so for me, what that entails is I do it in different kinds of ways. I think I agree with you, Sean, that sort of the meditative experiences of riding a motorcycle, the flow state that you described, I think is really a powerful thing. It's basically like really only focusing on one thing, maybe, right? I also, and then there is something that I like to do, which is called sort of choiceless awareness, right? Which is where I'm basically just whatever I am, I'm paying attention to even the most minute feelings in my body or whatever. I do think, though, and including my thoughts, right? Just basically into like, watching my thoughts as they develop, right? Watching my mind do what my mind does, not trying to control it, but quite the opposite. So anyone else want to jump in on that? I mean, I just wanted to sort of.
Well, yeah, I want to say that, like when I was riding my bike this morning on the freeway and I was feeling that state, I had to pull myself back because it's very easy when you're on a bike, especially when it's smooth and there's no problems going on, to get into that sort of trance, which can dull your awareness of what's going on. And so that's something that actually can become dangerous when you're going down the road at 80 miles an hour, right?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And this is one thing I wanted to mention too, and that is, I think it's important to that. Man, yeah. As we're talking about this, I'm glad we're having this conversation because meditation is so hard to define. But what I certainly completely reject is any kind of outrageous metaphysical claims, right? So, and the idea, for example, that consciousness. You mentioned this. We were having our group chat about this earlier this week, Sean, and that the idea that consciousness precedes matter, right? Right. Like that is a really important flub. Unbelievable. I mean, I find that to be unbelievable. I'm not a dualist, right? And maybe we should talk about dualism versus in meditation and in general.
Joe brought up a really important point about this on our group chat, and he was saying that it's not just dualism; it's actually reverse monism. Essentially saying that the only thing that's real is consciousness, and matter is an illusion, right? The Maya of matter and the samsara of pain of existence is all illusion, and the only thing that actually matters is consciousness or God consciousness.
Before we get there, I do want to give you a functional definition of meditation.
Do it.
That's specific, and it's the best one I've come up with. That's actually a worthwhile definition. Meditation is being aware of your own thoughts. That being aware that you're thinking and being able to understand that you like. So the difference between I'm thinking about the fight I had with my wife, and the fight is taking all of my attention in my mind, or some of my attention is going to look, I'm thinking about my wife having a fight with my wife. I'm aware of that.
That's Marvin Minsky calls this self-reflective thinking. And he uses the idea of self-reflective thinking to kind of separate sentient animals from non-sentient animals. Like in order to be able to think about yourself thinking, that takes a higher level of consciousness than just instinct, just base reptilian kind of instinct. And I don't know if it has to do with brain structure or what, but only certain animals are able to like pass the mirror test to be self-aware, things like that.
Yep. That's so important. What a great definition. Great point, Sean. Because it's basically breaking out of discursive thought, right? And being able to do that and doing that, first of all, being able to do that while sitting down, but the ultimate goal is to be able to do that in real time, right? Because that allows one to be able to get off of an elevator of emotions right?
Exactly.
If one wants to, right? I mean, there might be times where there's a really good reason to be really fucking pissed off, but that might not be when I'm sitting in a meeting at work, right? That might not mean when I'm driving down the road, or frankly on my motorcycle, right? Because that's a terrible time to get really pissed off. But I was talking to my wife earlier, and she mentioned like the idea, and I. This idea of like people say, oh, you know what? I just got in a fight with my wife. I'm going to jump on my motorcycle and go for a ride. What a terrible idea. Terrible idea. No, that is like, you want to be in the moment when you're on your motorcycle, not like ruminating in your head about something. And so, and this sort of goes into what I think is valuable about meditation for me, and that proselytizing element is important here, right? Because there's a new bench in this, Joe, in the group chat, and that is there are so many ways to get to this exact point. Right. It doesn't necessarily mean sitting on a fucking cushion or whatever, right?
No.
But the bottom line is being able to, as a person who has felt, I spent so much of my life feeling like I am tortured by my thoughts and my brain and the tendency to ruminate and not be able, like being able to say, okay, step outside of that, even for just seconds at a time, I have found to be very, very useful. So great points, guys. Great points.
Yeah, I mean, and making metaphysical claims isn't really helpful, honestly. I mean, it's stupid. Like you guys are we can talk about dualism. It's an awesome subject. I love talking about it. But in terms of just the pragmatics, what you're really trying to do here is, for example, is not react all the time, not get defensive all the time. You know, realize that what you say is going to have an influence in the world. It's going to fuck you over. So why do it? Right. Right. And like, if you can be aware of your own thoughts, and that you can train that, right? Then it gives you a lot more empowerment, self-empowerment. Now, it's really critically important that I'm not pushing this on anybody. Right?
Me neither.
I think there's a lot of other ways, like Sean said and Christophe said, to achieve the same thing. You don't have to sit in lotus position or do any other kind of formal meditation to get to the same place. Yeah. You know, and that's important. I've learned to really be humble. I've been meditating on and off for like 35 years, right? But I'm not the kind of person that's going to go to a retreat either. I just don't do that. You know,
I don't want to do anything. I don't
like unless Sam Harris that goes and spends 2 years with gurus and stuff. I don't do that. But I have
any kind of the guru stuff, the whole guru thing. So problematic.
Well, and this is really where my objection comes from, where I feel the need to go hard against meditation and mock meditation is because of the sense that no matter if you talk to somebody who's really into it, they're always going to tell you you're doing it wrong. Because I might say, hey, I think about my thoughts all the time. And they'll go, no, you don't. No, you're not doing it. That's not true. You need to do this, this, and this way. And if you're not breathing and doing your breathing exercises, and all these kind of things. And it's just like, fuck off. That's what the way I feel about it. And I also want to mention this point about Vulcans, because you brought up Vulcans. And the reason why Vulcans are so enamored with logic and why they are so good at it is because they nearly destroyed themselves like thousands of years ago through expressing all of their emotions. And so what have they done? They figured out how to get them under control, how to sort of transform them into a logical, rational existence, but they are still affected by them. If you look at every character from Spock to T'Pol to Tuvok, all the way on down, all the Vulcan characters, they have this volcanic rage inside of them that is just boiling under the surface, and volcanic, sex drive that only erupts once every 7 years, and it's going to kill them if they don't have sex, right? So it's almost like I feel like there's a trade-off that's made, and it really is repression. It's not transmutation. You haven't done anything with these emotions. You've just figured out how to put them under wraps, and so I'm not really sure that the Vulcans are better.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's true in terms of the Vulcans, for sure, because T'Pol and all of that, they have these like freakouts. Of course, they're also, there wouldn't be much of a show if they didn't. So so there's also that. But I mean, I think for us, for those people who decide to meditate or want or like it, or I first of all, let me back up. I think, Sean, that there really are people out there that who are the namaste people, right? The people that are like, oh, everything's fine. I've got no problems. Da, da, da. And by the way, there's people that are in Alcoholics Anonymous, and I've had the same experience with people in Alcoholics Anonymous saying that, like, I've got no problems anymore. I just released it all to God. The same thing with religious people say the same thing, right? Like they have this saccharine, sweet smile, and they're just like, oh no, I've got no problems. Da, da, da. That is, I think, that is the dark road that one can walk down with meditation if one is looking to simply find a religion that they can justify to themselves, right?
Yeah.
But that is not necessarily true. I think you correctly said that most people are going to end up walking down that path. But it's also true that most people are going to end up walking down a religious path anyway, so we shouldn't be surprised by that.
Right.
But in terms of what, for me, and again, we talked about at the top of this, that like what meditation is ends up being quite a subjective concept. But I can speak for it for me, and that is that for me, it ends up me being able to not that I suppress the emotions, because I am a very emotional guy, and so I certainly don't suppress my emotions, but I don't have to be ruled by them, right? I can be bottom line is I can be less reactive. That's the bottom line, just less reactive, because sometimes I don't want to be reactive. I mean, I live in a society. I can't just walk around. Like sometimes I remember one time when right after the election, and I probably told the story already, but I was out to dinner with my wife and her best friend and her best friend's sister and her best friend's sister's husband, if you can follow all that. But we were out to dinner, and I was walking ball of rage after that election. For 6 months, I was a walking ball, and in retrospect, it felt very self-righteous. And I felt justified in being angry. But it got to this point where this fucking idiot said something, and at the dinner table, and I said, "What?" And I could not control my outburst. I could not control it. So like that was the moment in which I said, something here has to change. And I was meditating long before that, but like it was like, the point is, my emotions, I feel like like a Vulcan in that way, right? Like there is a potential for explosion under there. And I need to express that in a way that's useful. Which is not repressing, obviously. But anyway, that's my story.
Listen, I'm Sicilian. We do angry. Right? Yeah. Right. Here's what I learned though, like over the years of meditation, is like if I can stop the spiraling process of thought that comes with the emotion, it's all the better. Like, because the emotion then leads to thinking, and leads to resentment, it leads to like scenarios, it leads to like paranoia and all this shit. And if I kept, oh wait a minute, I'm going there again. I don't want to go there. Right. And then the emotion kind of dissipates a lot faster, but they're still there. They're always there.
Yeah, they're always there.
It's to me, it's more about setting internal boundaries, right? Because we all have to set boundaries with other people, but a lot of people don't set internal boundaries with themselves. You decide I'm going to do something and then you don't do it, or you decide you're not going to do something and you do it. For everything from addiction to schedule. I'm going to watch. I'm only going to watch one more episode, and then pretty soon you're up all night. So it's like, but establishing those internal boundaries, I think, is something that's important for self-discipline and interaction with others. Because if you can't set them with yourself, you're certainly not going to be able to set them with anybody else. Yeah, good point.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And I think there's so many ways to get at that. It's funny, as you mentioned that, I think about addiction. I think about like drug addiction, alcoholism, or whatever else, and that is a fundamental problem, right? That comes that drug addicts and alcoholics tend to have. And it doesn't just usually, it's alcohol and drugs usually it's just sort of a symptom of it, right? Usually it's like these are problems that end up pervading the entire person's life. Maybe they didn't learn it when they were younger. They didn't have boundaries when they were younger. I'm sure there's a ton of literature about why kids aren't able to sort of put those boundaries? I wonder. I've been in therapy for years, and it's been useful. I wonder, though, I'm just wondering out loud now, like, why is it that putting those emotional boundaries up can be really challenging for people? I don't know. We're not psychiatrists, but
it's a good point. I do want to say one of the dangers of meditation is narcissism.
Oh yeah.
Honestly, that happened to me to some extent.
Mm-hmm.
I thought I was a cat's ass because I was meditating for years and years and years, and I could handle all kinds of shit. And then something hit me that I could not handle, and it just fucking destroyed me. And it was the most humbling experience of my life, and it was the best experience in some ways because it humbled me. And I was like, wow, there's more to life than just what these gurus are telling you, or what it is more to it. And we are human. And that's what I learned about that experience, that I am human and I have all of these human things about me. And yeah, sure, you can meditate, you can do all this stuff, and it's great. You can study, read books and all that. But we have to understand our own humanity first and foremost, like meditation sometimes can really cause a lot of arrogance in people.
Oh yeah.
Right? It really can. And also, and then on top of that arrogance, we're proselytizing is just a bad combination.
Combination. Then you end up like Sam Harris, right? And we're going to talk a little bit about that later.
Well, think about what religion does in general, which is to tell you that you're broken and then offer the cure. And I think that there's a certain aspect of that within meditation in terms of when they talk about the monkey mind and people's lack of self-discipline, people's anger and rage, right? And so then here's the cure. But I think when you get to the bottom of why we have this anger and rage and why our minds are constantly, flitting from one thing to another, we're multitasking. We're processing a lot of information our minds evolved the way they evolved for a reason. It doesn't necessarily mean that they don't need training and that we don't need to get to know ourselves. But I think there's this assumption somehow that people who are meditators have achieved this superior state of control. And I have found that what they've really done is they've split off, right? They've, when everything's fine on the surface, they're going to be very calm and very soft-spoken and everything else like that. But they have an extremely violent rage like a Vulcan that's going to, when you get them going, like, for example, if a meditator who needs to be alone for 20 or 30 minutes and quiet every day, well, what happens when that, person is disturbed? How does that person respond when their meditation is interrupted repeatedly, like on a given day? Are they able to go, oh, well, I'm at peace with the world, whatever happens, happens? Or are they going to fly into a rage that they didn't get to do their practice that day?
Yeah. Is it actually working when it's needed, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, meditation, right? Meditation's only useful if it's useful. I mean, if it is absolutely true, I think, and not even I think, I know this to be true. And that is that folks think that they're Mr. Spiritual Guru and nothing bothers me, except for that it really does. And I think that that individual is being profoundly dishonest with themselves. I also think, though, that one need not be a meditator to be profoundly dishonest with themselves. So
it's true.
What I'm saying? No, I mean? Right. So it might just be a person who is profoundly dishonest with themselves. And also that, and this, to your point, Sean, and to your point too, Joe, is that you slather it with meditation and someone's like, oh yeah, but that rage and is somehow justified, or is that I am, it is your fault that I'm upset because, or whatever else, right? It ends up becoming this sort of problem. So, I mean, look, I think you frequently say, Joe, that it's a tool, right? It's a tool in a toolbox for me, right? So there are many things that I try to do to regulate my emotions, ranging from smoking weed to drinking to talking to my wife to going for a motorcycle ride to meditating, right? And meditating is just one of those tools. And I think that to the extent that it becomes I was about to say to the extent that it becomes a ritual, I'm not necessarily anti-ritual. But that said, to the extent that it becomes something that is like, I am not okay unless I do it, right? And once it becomes this thing that like, I am broken because that really hit me, Sean. You've said this before, and this is the fundamental problem with religion. It's the biggest fucking scam in the world, is that there's something inherently wrong with you, right? There's something inherently wrong with my mind, right? But no, of course, and a good the good meditation structures, the good meditation instructions that I've had is that, look, it's not about stopping your mind from jumping from one place to another. It's just being aware of the fact that your brain is jumping from one thing to another. That's an important distinction, right? Because there isn't anything wrong with my mind. My mind is doing exactly what it's built to do.
Exactly. Well, think about this. Okay. We have intergenerational trauma. We have trauma because of capitalism. We have trauma because of white supremacy. We have trauma because of war. There's all of these things that have interrupted our natural development and that cause people to be imbalanced in their emotions, right? And so, you know, maybe meditation can help people deal with some of that, but in a lot of cases, it becomes sublimation or repression, right? To try to deny that you're in a capitalist hellscape. You have to show up at this job for, 55 hours a week or 65 hours a week or whatever it is, dealing with people that you hate.
For 60 years.
Yeah. And then your body's broken, you can't afford healthcare, and you're going to retire on dog food or whatever. It's just, there's a lot of things in life that are real problems that are not going to get solved by changing the way you think.
That's a really great point. And one of our mutual Facebook friends has wrote about this just this week, which was interesting, fortuitous, because we were doing this podcast this week. And he wrote that capitalism creates this trauma, right? And we're born into it. And you're right on point. White supremacy, that is built into our psyches, right? And that is a very, very real thing that ideally we wouldn't need anything, meditation to deal with those things. I do think, though, that there's something inherent about the human condition, right? Because if it wasn't capitalism, then it would be the fact that there would be like a raiding band of rapists who coming to steal my wife and kill me or whatever. You know what I mean? Like,
it wasn't better before. It was not better before.
It was definitely not better before. No noble savage tropes here. But so my point, but what I'm getting at is that I think that there is something. And we talk about this a lot on the show, is that there is nature doesn't care whether or not we're happy, right? And in fact, keeping me in a state of relative anxiety probably has some value to me in my survivability over time, right? If I were calm and peaceful all the time, those people probably didn't make it, right? Those human beings didn't make it because they were killed. So now, if you
don't care about dying, you're not going to try to stay alive.
Exactly. So we have this existential angst, right? And so even if we solve the problems, even if we have problems where we don't have to worry about working for 30 years at a job that sucks our soul, even if we don't have to deal with the soul, little s, no fucking soul. Look, that's just my position. That's my.
I'm glad you said that. I'm glad you said that.
But
there's no fucking soul.
But there is something agitating about being a human being. Right. And that's what I and not for everybody. I think there's varying ranges of that. Right. I think I happen to be on the high key end of that, where I am like highly anxious, highly prone to depression. Right. These sort of techniques end up helping me. Some people are like super chill. My wife is probably the chillest person you'll ever fucking meet. Like, she just pretty much nothing bothers her. It's just how she is. Except for white supremacy. And also things with the yard. So she has her things, but you know what I mean. So anyway, my point, what I'm getting at is that, like, look, I think in terms of the toolbox, meditation can be useful, but like you said, Sean, we don't want to use that as an excuse to not address the systemic problems that make our lives miserable.
Right. And that can happen. I mean, like, look at Sam Harris and his turn to anti-social justice causes. Now, and here's a guy who talks a lot about the fact that the ego is not real, right? That we can transcend it, we can reach enlightenment. Which, by the way, the whole concept of enlightenment is problematic. But
that is problematic, absolutely.
And at the same time, so if that's all true, why get all huffy and puffy about the fact that people don't want to be called, names, racist names? I mean, how does that make sense? He spends so much time defending himself,
Yeah.
What is he defending if he doesn't have an ego?
And if you're not,
a great point. That's a great point, Mr. Harris.
Right.
yeah, and also, he is not so much pushing an intellectual point of view as he spends most of his time railing against wokeness and railing against social justice, right? And it's like, if you're someone who considers themselves enlightened, and you're white and you're male, and you haven't acknowledged what that means, then it just becomes, it's masturbatory.
Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah, he is very deeply problematic on these issues, and like astonishingly tone deaf. For a guy who started out his public career writing really outstanding stuff, right? Like stuff that was game changing, right? Like in the same vein of Dennett and Dawkins, right? Like and Hitchens, and all of a sudden to make this turn to the right. Although we see now with Dawkins as well, right? Like these and Pinker as well, like right. These guys are white men at the end of the day, and so regardless of how enlightened they are in terms of science and in terms of atheism, et cetera, right? They are still working in the same systems that we're talking about here, and still very, very much prone to those things. And with the Waking Up app and the Waking Up program that Harris has, he's trying to spread meditation to the world, but in some ways he's almost poisoning it, right? He's almost making it worse, right? Because it's like, wait, that's what meditation is? Like what this guy's fucking saying? Like, I mean, what do you say? Yeah.
He's turning it into a product, first of all. And it does, right. If everyone's mind is individual, right? We all have a mind. We all self-reflect. And so it's so subjective. In order for me to tell someone else what they should do to self-reflect is like, it's impossible. It's like it's literally trying to see with someone else's eyes. And I will never, as long as I live, be able to see myself as you see me or as anyone else sees me. It's not possible. Right. Can't get out of yourself. And so for someone who's only had their own experience to try to kind of generalize as to what other people should do in terms of how they control their mind and their thoughts and all of those things, it's just like, I don't know. It just doesn't work.
Yeah. I think it was, go ahead, Joe.
I just think what you're talking about, Sean, is being humble about these things in some ways, understanding your own limits. And, I read Sam Harris, I listened to Sam Harris's book, Awaken Now, or whatever.
Waking Up.
Waking Up. And, some of it was really good. I mean, he makes some interesting points about meditation and about mental cognition, and he throws in some science. But some of it was just, I don't know, it was very uninspiring. Let's just put it that way. I mean, there was nothing there to it. So some of it was good, and some of what he says was interesting and useful, right? But then he also, there's sort of a almost like you were saying this, Sean, there's almost like two people writing the book. Right? He gets into this stuff, which it was just very speculative and very rhetorical, and then if it was just that, fine, okay, he wrote a book, it's mixed reviews, no big deal. But then he's quoted by the alt-right like all the time,
right,
for what he's saying. That's because he's now saying that racism, people should not identify with race because that's a flaw, right. because ultimately there's no ego, so how can there be race? Right. And that is just so esoteric and out there. And it just there's no pedal to the metal there. It's just all like, just mental masturbation in some ways about.
Well, yeah, absolutely. That it is. And it's like being a rich person and going, why are you worried about money? Why are all these people worried about money?
Exactly. It's like Caitlyn Jenner or whatever, right?
Yeah.
Like, right. It's right. I mean, it's just this astonishing inability, especially for a guy who wrote the landscape book, right? The moral landscape. He wrote the moral landscape, and his whole concept is that we should create a moral system based on people's suffering. That's basically the thrust of the entire book. And then here he is these years later, right? Saying like, oh, by the way, all that doesn't matter because it's all in your head. What?
He's telling trans people, black people, suck it up. You know,
Yeah,
I don't care if
suck
you're
it up.
suffering. You know.
Oh, and by the way, buy my book and buy my product, and I'll teach you how to not care about the fact that there are people who want to murder you for being you.
Right.
I mean, what an astonishing level of arrogance! Astonishing level of arrogance.
Sad. It's sad.
It's really a real like devolution because, like I said, and I think I know this is true for you, Sean. Like those early books were really, really good. And for me, I was really young when they came out, and they were very formative for me, right, in terms of my outlook and my view. So to see this guy who really just wasting a platform, right? Not just wasting a platform, because that would imply that he's just not, that nothing bad is coming from it, but like actually turning it into a negative platform where we get to overlook social justice because I don't have an ego, right?
He was pivotal for me. He gave me the courage to really, because of his statement, he actually echoed Martin Luther King, who talked about the white moderate as being the worst enemy of justice. And Sam Harris talks about the religious moderate as being the most dangerous because they make the world safe for extremists, right? So he's like right in lockstep with everyone who's ever fought for justice in the world. He's making the right calls, and that's when I came out and I was like, okay, damn it, imagine no religion. Like we get this, the end of faith. This is it. This is done. We're moving past this, okay? And then all of a sudden, to watch him take this fall, starting in around the time he wrote "Waking Up" is when he started this slide into the alt-right kind of mentality, where he became someone who's very quotable by them now.
Yeah, absolutely. And he has a black guy, by the way, that he had come on the show, and he was like a guy who looked up to Sam Harris, and when you hear the guy talk, very, very smart guy, when you hear him talk, he sounds like Sam Harris. Like his inflection's the same. It's very clear that that he has followed Harris, and now comes on Sam Harris's show and is parroting the same basic talking points of being like, hey, the wokeism and all that awful language that we talk about all the time, that is basically just denying the experience of people of color and marginalized communities. And that's really interesting, right? Because Harris's whole thing is about experience. Like, I've listened to his meditations. I've listened to what he has to say. His whole thing is that I'm not making any metaphysical claims here. I'm talking about as a matter of experience. He always says as a matter of experience, but that's
his
really
experience,
his experience. But I think it's really funny for him to talk about about experience and then deny the experience of others, of people who are really actually suffering. And he sits there in whatever, in LA or wherever he is in Malibu, with raking in dollars. It again, a really sad sort of fall from grace. And Mathew Remski, our friend of the show, he was on one of our earliest episodes, and he's great. You should listen to his podcast, by the way, called Conspirituality. And he really does a great job of just tearing Harris apart. And I really suggest that everybody reads that. I won't go through it here, but I do quibble a little bit with Remski's characterization of what Harris says to some extent, but I think he largely gets it right. The main thing I think that he gets right is this issue of, and this is the conspirituality hobby horse, right? This language of that gurus and folks that are in these powerful positions with in relationship to their constituents, to their students or whatever, and they use this. I love what he says. He says, he compares Harris's voice and the way his soothing Sam Harris voice. Right. You know how is Sam Harris? Oh, yeah. And then he compares that to intrusive eye, intrusive eye contact, because that's the thing that gurus do. They do this thing where they basically won't stop staring into your eyes, right? Mm-hmm. And of course, as human beings, we don't like that, right? So eventually you're going to look away. If your goal isn't to stare somebody down, you're going to look away, and that ends up being a psychological sort of hook, right? It's really an amazing article. I really suggest everybody read it. I wonder if you guys have any thoughts on it. Either of you.
It's been a little bit since I read it, but I remember having I posted it when I read it. And
I remember. That's why I read it.
A good reaction to it, because I felt like it really took the piss out of Sam Harris in a way that nobody else quite had. And I agree with pretty much everything he says there.
Yeah, he gets it right.
We'll put the article in the show notes.
I read it a little while ago, but it was a well-written article. It made some very good points. I thought he presented his arguments quite well. Remski did. And I agree with a lot of it. I don't know if I agree with all of it like you, but I did think he made some very valid points, valid critiques.
Yeah, and like my critique of the article would be that it ends up like, because Mathew Remski has he has an agenda, right? Like, I mean, right, that's what I don't mean a bad agenda. We have an agenda too, right? I mean, but we all have an agenda, but his agenda, right, is to fit Sam Harris into the conspirituality sort of, sort of like format. So I think there was some place where he sort of shoehorned him in a little bit, and
that's a good way of putting it.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
In a way, but it's none of it was like all out wrong. That's for sure. Like none of it was like, oh no, he completely blew it there. Sometimes I was like, okay, but you know what? He's writing an article, right? And he's a journalist, by the way. So and it was a very persuasive piece. I recommend everybody read it. But so what else can we say about meditation? I mean, does anybody have any comment on gurus in particular that you want to mention?
Yes. Let's talk about enlightenment. And Sam Harris talks a lot about enlightenment. Then he also says he doesn't make any metaphysical claims, but that is a metaphysical claim.
It definitely is.
I mean, how can you say otherwise to believe that somebody could reach that state? It flies in the face of like what we know about, consciousness in the mind, and people. I mean, and he's a neurologist, I guess, right?
That's his training.
That's his training for sure.
I don't understand that. I mean, I'm not a neurologist, so maybe he has something on me that I don't get, but I just don't understand how you can say those two things concurrently. No matter what you believe, right? They're just inconsistent.
Right. That's right.
I think the word metaphysics in general is abused by almost everyone. I mean, it's a philosophical term, and the word metaphysics pretends that there can be different ways, sort of looking at the world, right? Different, and I think there is only one way of looking at the world, and that is materialism. But philosophically, I would get attacked for that. As well, that's your metaphysics, and we have how can you rule out, and how can you this, and how can you, all of this bullshit where because we can't prove something not true, we should suddenly assume that it's true. And that's like my metaphor for that is, okay, well, if I'm doing a transaction with you and I'm buying your house for $1 million, and I hand you a safe and I say, here, this safe has got $1 million worth of gold in it, you're going to want to open the safe. You're not going to just you don't want to see that there's actually $1 million in there, and me not be able to say to you, well, prove there's not $1 million in there. It's like, no, open the fucking safe, right? And so with these claims that are being made by Harris or by any spiritual guru whatsoever, right? They're untestable.
Yeah.
They're subjective. They're untestable, and that's by design. Because if something can be tested, then it can be proven true or not true, and then you have to act accordingly. But if it's untestable, the grifter, the con artist, the guru, whatever you want to call them, can in perpetuity play that card. You can't prove it's not true.
Yeah. And that's really interesting in terms of Harris in particular, right? Because he, first of all, does claim that he makes no metaphysical claims right before he makes metaphysical claims. But but he also does this thing where he is, because I think that he basically does that to sort of keep his scientific chops, right? And say like, oh, no, don't worry, I'm not making any of those claims. But to go back to what we talked about earlier in the show is that he claims to know precisely what meditation is. Right, he has the key, and that Remski brings this up really in a really poignant way in the show, because he does this thing where it's just like, again, his assumption is like everybody else doesn't know what meditation is. If they knew what I knew, they would obviously agree with me. And the logic is obviously circular, right? And look, Sam Harris is a really smart guy, but this is not a problem just with Sam Harris, as you say, Sean. This is a problem across for gurus in general, for grifters in general, this idea that like, I am first of all the bearer of all things true, and if you don't listen to me, then it's your problem that you're not happy or getting this or understand this. This happens to Alcoholics Anonymous too, by the way.
Right.
So when people who end up going out and drinking, it's their problem. It's their the truth. That don't worry, Alcoholics Anonymous isn't wrong, right? That couldn't possibly be true. The problem is those people are not, right? And then of course the only people that are in Alcoholics Anonymous are people who for whom it works, right?
Right.
It works for some people, but it doesn't work for everybody.
This is the same thing that gets said about meditation is if you haven't gotten benefits from meditation, it means you haven't been doing it enough, or you haven't practiced enough, or you don't, or you haven't learned the technique well enough, or whatever. It's always put back on the individual. And, by the way, I just have to say this one thing about his metaphysical claims stuff.
Yeah, go.
At the same time, he's talking in this logical manner, but then he's talking about something his guru told him that he just has to believe.
That's so true. He does that all the time. You just read the book, Joe, so because he goes to India, right? And he learns these techniques or whatever, and then he comes back and says gurus are bad, even though I learned this from a guru, right? And also the metaphysics of this. Don't worry, I'm not making any metaphysical claims. Right before he makes metaphysical claims, it is really an astonishing thing.
So I can tell you, when I was younger, I was totally into wanting to become enlightened for a while.
Same thing with me.
And when I began to look into it and read about it, and I started reading all these gurus and so on, I realized they were just human beings,
Right?
And they're flawed. And this is fine because we're all flawed, right? But the worship of them was the problem, right? The people worship them as something mystical, like beyond, transcendent, that don't follow the laws of nature anymore.
That's right.
Right. And, we need to grow up, right? And stop worshiping people like this. They may, and it's not to say never to listen to them or not to have teachers and all that, but understand that they are flawed human beings, not that they're some kind of godlike creatures, right? Or angels, or because literally that's the state of mind that people get into.
That's really is. It really is that. That really is it. And it ends up, and this is a very human problem, right? Yeah. Like this, like you can throw this into really, I mean, we have an entire party that has elevated their leader to a god. I mean, there are murals out there that make him essentially Jesus, right? That is what the evangelicals see him as one of the returning kings, right? That's how they see him. This is a human problem. And so, and that's what I wanted to hit on for my little spiel in this, for today. And the theme that I want to get at is that like, meditation absolutely is and can be abused, just like anything else, right? It is a human problem. And so anyone who thinks that like it is somehow different than religion in its capacity to be abused is wrong, right? But it's also true that it can be useful in a way that perhaps religion can be useful too, I suppose. But I think it can be useful in a way that is not necessarily destructive, I guess. Yeah. I would sort of, say that anyone who wants to look into it out there who's listening.
I'm generally in agreement with you on this. Absolutely.
Yeah. Come out with like an open mind and try to separate the practice and perhaps its capacity for you. If you want to do that, don't do it if you don't want to do it. But if that's something that's been bubbling around your mind, because if you're me, I went through this thing where I was in it for a long, long time, but then I was like, oh, no, this is like, this is basically the same thing as a religion, and I don't want to do this, and so I can't do this. I don't want to do that, and I think that can be, and so it's not that I was like depriving myself of it because I thought, oh, it's a religion, and it's like, and I came back to it with a new perspective, saying that like, look, this doesn't have to be a religion, right? And for me, it's useful.
When I was shaking my head, about religion, not about what you're saying
that's
about
what I was
meditation.
laughing at, the religion comment.
Because here's the thing. I mean, and it is true. It is true that religion has been useful in history to get people to cooperate. But we've outgrown it, and the only reason why it's still around is because people are afraid of dying, and that's it.
And also because people find it as a very, very useful tool for power, basically, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like
controlling others. Yeah,
controlling
the other
others.
benefit of religion is that it is community. It does provide community to people. And that's an important part of it. There are other ways to get community though, right? I mean, but religion does do that for a lot of people.
I think that is true. I think that's right. Go ahead, Sean.
Well, it's just, okay. It's like, the price is too high, man. If that's what if you have to give all that up, if you have to give up your sanity and your rationality and put up with grifters just to have community, is community really even worth it?
Well, I mean, the three of us believe that for sure, but I'm just saying that I'm just trying to sort of look as a researcher, right? And observe the world. I'm not making any moral claims here.
Right. No metaphysical claims. No metaphysical claims being made here. And we're getting short on time here, guys. And it's been a really amazing conversation. You guys are great, and this is a really important conversation. So what I wanted to say in terms of the religious piece is that religion has been useful as a social glue for sure over time, but it is absolutely outgrown its usefulness, and now it is just destructive. I do think though that the community element's there, but again, it need not be a religious community, right? The Unitarians are a great example, right? The Unitarians it's basically just a group of people, right? Like that's essentially all it is. And I'm not justifying that because it's a religion, but still the concept of people getting together and having like rights, R-I-T-S, R-I-T-E-S,
yes,
and all that kind of stuff can be very, very useful to people.
Yeah.
Look, somebody's got to perform weddings. Somebody's got to be there when people die. Somebody's got to comfort the sick and all that sort of stuff. But religion, in terms of community, it sucks all of the oxygen out of the room. Like imagine if there were no churches, right? Can you imagine all of the other groups and organizations and things that would just spring up in their stead for people wanting to get together and have social functions, right?
Absolutely.
But their religions they're just everywhere. They're on every corner. They've always got their hand out, and somehow people think it's a good bargain because they keep giving.
Yeah, it's true.
I mean, if you look at the young people these days, they're abandoning religions in droves, honestly.
That's right.
And they're finding other ways of creating community.
That's exactly right. And religions are on the decline in terms of people coming because there are so many other ways. We need not go to church every Sunday to have a community. And social media, by the way, right,
is a huge replacement.
It's a huge replacement. Think about Facebook. And like, I wouldn't know you, Joe, if not for Facebook. And here we are now. We have this relationship. It's not a substitute for in-person contact, for sure, but it definitely can be a place. And I mean, that's the good side of social media. The bad side, obviously, it also is a place for a haven for people, for white supremacists, for example, to find each other in the dark corners of the internet the way they weren't before. But still, that can be useful. And so the point is, I think what you were saying, Joe, is that community is important to human beings, right? Churches used to do that. They still do this for some people, but they also come with the baggage they come with, Sean, is beyond the pale. And that's why we talk about it here on the show all the time.
So if it weren't for the fact that you have things like the Trump movement and this right-wing religious resurgence and then your oppression against, gays and lesbians and transgender and queer folk and all of that, and if you didn't have, people getting their money, retirees getting their money sucked out, religion would be okay.
Right.
No, I mean,
if not for all the things that make religion.
I'm sure there are some wonderful religious people out there. There's some really cool religious communities that are doing okay in the world, that are not causing harm. But as a whole, if you look at the totality of it, it's a very destructive ideology now. I agree with you guys there for sure.
Absolutely.
And it needs to be, the truth to power here, right? We have to talk about it. We can't give them a pass. That's what's been happening over and over again. Religion has gotten a pass over and over and over. They don't have to pay taxes.
That's right.
Right. You can't diss them because all of a sudden it makes you the bad person. It's just like,
it's technically against Facebook community standards to even criticize religion.
Which is just what other institution in our society gets that kind of a pass? Nothing. Nobody else gets that pass. And it's really, really an amazing thing when you think about it. Oh, look, that's why we are the radical secular. That's what we do here, is what we talk about. And look, we are getting to the end of our conversation here, guys. Do you have any final thoughts, anything about meditation gurus or metaphysical claims?
Well, I do hope that we do talk about dualism at some point. I'm sorry that I unscrewed that a little while ago, but I do think it's a worthwhile subject. And I am not exactly in the same position. I don't think all three of us are. We have unique points of view on that subject.
I think so.
I think we should talk about it. I think it would be really exciting to do that.
Yeah,
put it on the list.
We could do an episode about consciousness and dualism, because that's a huge point of departure for religion. But I just want to say that I think I may have said this once before, but I do believe that meditative practice, spiritual practice, it's a personal matter. It should be kept personal. It's like, I don't want to know about your sex life. I don't want to know about your meditation. I don't want to know about what you do in your house ever. Right. That's kind of where I think of this these are private matters. They should be kept private. And
that's what I do.
Goes back to your point about proselytizing that you brought up in the very beginning of the show.
Yeah, I think that is right. I think that is the big takeaway here and we talk about that on the show all the time. That's what secularism is. Keep your shit to yourself, right? If someone else wants to do something that doesn't harm other people, go ahead and do that. If you want to pray to Jesus and you want to do that, go for it. We will shrug our shoulders and say, I don't know what you're doing, but go for it. And we here will, those of us who want to meditate can, and those of us who don't want to shouldn't. And we should just definitely not try and jam our views on these very private, personal sort of issues down other people's throats, otherwise we would just be no better than the conservatives. So let's finish it off here, gentlemen. If you like our show, make sure to subscribe, leave a review, check out theradicalsecular.com, and tell your friends to listen. New episodes post Mondays at noon Eastern on YouTube and all the major podcast channels. And if you're into reading, check out the blog at theradicalsecular.com. I'm Christophe Defoe. Thanks for being here. And remember, wherever you are, you can be radically secular.